I'll introduce our next speaker, speakers in fact. As I said, we were switching around our last two presentations. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Martin Scholten, who's Director of Animal Sciences and a member of the Board of Directors at Wageningen University and Research, and also Dr. Jean-Louis Peyraud, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, who is Agricultural Scientific Director at INRA. And together they are going to tackle the conversation around circularity, livestock being essential for food, resource, security and climate change. I welcome you both to the stage and give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So now something different, a duo presentation. It will be a real duo presentation. Hopefully it helps you to focus on. We are very grateful for all the other speakers today because we can extend upon their basic information they give. For sure, you will recognize elements that Anne Mottet introduced to you about the role of livestock in food security, but also the things that Frank Mittlöhner mentioned to you about the role of livestock from a broader perspective. And actually we had a long title, but in short it is all about ruminants are essential to address the global challenges, the Sustainable Development Goals, I have to say, in a proper and a sustainable way, and in an integrated way. Actually, that is the core of our message. And what we see is that the Sustainable Development Goals are treated fragmentically. The issue of sustainability of livestock is treated very fragmentedly, and an integrated approach is needed. And I think today I'm more convinced learning from the other presenters here as well. We have 4 parts, and the first part is to bring you to ruminants for resource security. You know all about food security. And food security was the driver over the last 70 years, probably the last century. Norman Borlaug in Europe, Mansholt, the first Euro Commissioner, they had a clear message to everyone, to every farmer and to every scientist. It's all about increasing the production capacity, making more food. And Norman Borlaug and Mansholt said, and the best way to do it, the key to do that is to be efficient in your food production. And we did a very good job. And we can be very proud of that. And Frank already mentioned this morning how good the achievements are in the past. We had a sustainable intensification of our food system by the principle of production efficiency. As long as there is enough room and resources on the world, this is the best approach you can think of. And the footprint, when expressed on the unit of product, is the lowest by production efficiency. But if you're producing more food for more people, it accumulates to a footprint which is even becoming increasing. We see that resources become scarce. We see that that's the big challenge for the next part. So resource security is even as important as food security, and there comes the ruminants in. Because we only have one planet, so we have to do it with the resources that we have, and we need a very smart approach, integrated smart approach, to come to a best use, optimized use of the resources. And that means that we have to keep very safe in the resources that we have, that we use them in the most smart way. A linear way of thinking was good in the era of production efficiency, but for resource efficiency we need a system approach. Still keep on the production efficiency, so still keep on the green side, the green revolution side, but extend it in efficiency to a more blue approach, which include circularity. And actually, this line of thinking is also another approach than the Lancet Group is doing. Yeah, we have the planetary boundaries, and we have to stay within the planetary boundaries, but how are we calculating that? How are we going to guide that? Is the way of thinking that the agriculture is as it is and cannot change, and that you can calculate the total footprint of the food system on the basis of single commodities with linear, simple LCA models? Or is the solution in an integrated approach, and we need a system type of modeling? In the first approach, you see that there is too much beef produced, meat produced, and the single one-way option is to reduce the beef production, the meat production. In the right side part, the ruminants and the livestock plays an important role to optimize the performance of your food system, to stay within the planetary boundaries. The principle of this approach, where circularity is the engine of, is very simple: zero waste. Nobody can be against zero waste. So optimized use of the resources, no waste of produced biomass, biomass on the marginal fields, or biomass in the food system, or biomass in the agricultural system. If we are a little bit more unbounded smart in thinking, then we see that these are co-products that has a value. So the residual biomass is co-products in an connected integration. Leads to circular fertilizers, feed and food, and of course, within the performance of good for the environment, good for the climate, good for the biodiversity, and good for the animals, and good for the human health. In this approach, ruminants are the champions, because they are ruminants. As explained this morning, the ruminant has a microbe that can handle biomass that otherwise would be lost from the food system. Biomass from marginal grounds, biomass, even biomass from the sea, or biomass from the croplands, or biomass from the food industry. And yeah, we use already in livestock a lot of this kind of feed resources, but it can be extended. And on the other end, it is about a manure. Not just manure bringing to the ground, but processed manure that can meet the standards that synthetical fertilizers also have. Precision fertilizers without emissions. That's good for the quality of the soil. Let me tell you an example of this way of thinking about the Ethiopian cow. I once was in Ethiopia, and there was the cows, and they were fed with the straw that was a residual on the acre of the smallholder farmer. And the cow produced 2 liters milk per day. Normally, we would say, yeah, that's an Ethiopian cow, not a good producer. You need a Friesian Holstein from America. And yeah, the straw they cannot cope with. You need a good super feed from Holland. But what we did here was, if you have so much available on biomass straw that you cannot use as feed, can you use it as feed if we treat it with mushrooms, with fungi? So that the lignin is being broken off, and the final residual of that, yeah, you have to cover it because otherwise the fungi are blooming, and then all the proteins go in the in mushroom. We want to keep it in the substrate, and it appeared to be so good as fresh mown grass. And the Ethiopian cow produced 20 liters milk after this implementation. That's a 10-fold increase. And I saw also Friesian Holsteins from America in Ethiopia, and they find it rather hot there. This is my last slide for the part one, and that is about there is no circularity without ruminants. Actually, these are the models of our system, the group that do system calculations on sustainability of agricultural systems by Imke de Boer. She's leading that group. And the red one is when you calculate from a system perspective, how can you optimize your total food production system in a way that you use the minimum of resources? That is the y-axis. And the star is there where you find the optimum. So the lowest use of resources that you can think of. And here you see, this is the current situation. So the actual data of how we are practicing our agriculture at the moment. Then we need 25% animal production and 75% plant production. Actually, a little bit connected. It also says that when you go below that, when you go really to vegan, then you cannot argue that that's good for the environment. So the left thing is not completely true. If we want to improve environmental performance of the food system, by circularity, that's the green line, we can find an optimum which requires half of the resources in the land. And that is what Frank also showed. We do not have that much land and we do not have that much resources. So we have to be very keen to use all what we have in a smart and ecological sound way. But then we need a 50-50 balance between plant and animal production. Actually, that is almost the global balance at the moment. And also in 1950s, it was 50-50%. There is no change there. There is more produced. And if we want to produce even more, we have to stick to that 50-50%, but then with the resource efficiency. So sometimes Jean-Louis and myself, we are from the Animal Task Force, feel ourselves the meat busters.
Thank you. So, in the second part, we will look at more in detail some aspects which link food from feed using the ruminants. We know this kind of figure, and we read in literature that ruminants are inefficient, at least less efficient than poultry or pig production, because we recover in milk only 0.3 kg of protein per 1 kg of protein fed to the animals. And the situation is even worse in the beef system, especially in extensive beef. This is true. We cannot contest this value, and these values are indeed used to consider the rest which is excreted by the animals. And if the rest excreted by the animals is not well managed, they can lead to ammonia emission, to nitrate emission. But considering the feed food competition, these values are not the true one. Indeed, we produce milk, meat from livestock, ruminants, sheep to some extent also, from grassland and cropland. Ruminants are the only animal able to use grassland. And from cropland, we can use forages, and part cropland produce grain. From grain or wheat, we produce sugar, we produce wheat flour, we produce oils, but we produce a huge amount of byproducts, and these byproducts, in turn, are used by the animals. For sure, to some extent, animals, and especially dairy cows, use some grains. When we intensify the system, we use more and more grain and perhaps less and less grassland. So we need to think about the future. But indeed, ruminants are the champion of recycling. More than 70% in Europe. Anne this morning showed data from at the world level. Considering Europe, more than 70% of ruminant feed is not edible for you as human food. And so the competition need to be considered only this part of feed of animal that can be used as food for human. Considering this ratio, I put here the data of two classical dairy systems In France, indeed, but we can consider it is the west part of Europe. Here we can have intensive system as we have in Denmark, in Netherlands, in west part of France. Here it could be, we have this kind of system of France, but it could be also an Irish grassland-based system. You see that here we have 26% of the protein and dry matter eaten by the animals which is edible, and here only 10%. This is the global efficiency, very few poor value, 0.3, but the net efficiency, which is the total amount of protein produced in milk and meat of the animals, is 1 kg for 1 kg in this system, and it is 2.5 in this system, even in an intensive grassland management. Here, clearly, the animals are clearly net producers. And so far from being in competition with humans, at least dairy systems contribute to food security if they are well managed. Here is for energy. And you see we have exactly the same figure. The efficiency is slightly less, but it's slightly less because the digestibility of cell walls is low compared to digestibility of starch for the animals. Here is the same figure, but in a national survey. So we have in France the French Livestock Institute and Agricultural Chamber, and they manage the survey of 600 farms, more or less, in the country. And here it's a net efficiency of protein from 0 to 8, so 8 kg of protein produced in milk and meat per kg of protein edible eaten by the animals. And here is for energy with the same ratio. First, you see that 1/3 of the dairy system in France are net producer of energy and net producer of protein. They give the way for the future. They give the way. And 60-70% are net producer of protein. But to some extent, half or 60% of the dairy system are still net consumer of energy, and here is the mid value for the French livestock system. Net producer of protein, but slightly consumer of energy. But you see that even in maize-based diet or in grassland-based system, in green, you have some data where the farmers and their herd are net producer of protein and net producer of energy. The same figure for the beef system or the sheep system. Here, it's a classical system in France, so farmers who calf and fatten the calf with maize-based system and with using a lot of byproducts, beet pulp, wheat bran, distiller grain, so on. You see that you have a net efficiency. And for sheep, it's the same. Sheep produced in grassland are very efficient. Sheep which use a huge amount of concentrate because the objective of the farmers is to have free lambing period in 2 years, it's slightly less efficient. Similar data in UK, I found one paper on this subject. And not least, we need to think about marginal land. Anne discussed this morning about marginal land at world level, but it is also the case in European situation. And ruminant is the only way to produce food for marginal lands. Our marginal lands could be this kind of landscape, it's a Mediterranean zone. So here you see that this sheep produce protein in a very poor situation. And they produce, we will come back after, ecosystem services. For example, here, this herd is used to protect against fire. In Europe, we don't think that we have a huge amount of permanent grassland. 40 hectares of our agricultural area is permanent grassland. Think about Massif Central in France, Austria, the north of Italy, Ireland, and so on. At world level, it's the same situation. 25% of the meat produced at the world level came from this kind of landscape where we cannot produce wheat, we cannot produce nothing else apart savanna here, and it is used by the ruminant. For you.
Okay. Part number 3 is about the climate, because that is one of the things that cattle are accused for, the climate thing. And we discussed a lot about that. I didn't realize about the methane, but your presentation was very convincing. I go thinking, what did I miss so far, and what can I find in your way of looking at it? But this is still from the perspective that methane is a problem. Although we said in 2006, we had an FAO report in 2006 by Henning Steinfeld, livestock's long shadow, and it was all about that. I don't like that kind of problems. Problems are there to be solved by rethinking, and that's because I'm a great fan of a Dutch soccer player, Johan Cruyff, and he had one wisdom: every disadvantage has an advantage. So I learned that methane is there because ruminants have a rumen with microbes, and that these microbes makes them the champion in also circularity and also the champion in mitigating. So they're creating the problem, they can mitigate the problem, they can outbalance the problem, and especially when the methane is about that, but I come to it. There is a lot of change, because in 2013, FAO came with livestock long shadow, livestock tackling the climate change. And we learned this morning from Anne Motet that in 2019, FAO produced reports where it says it's not the way to reduce the livestock, it's the way to improve the livestock, improve the role of livestock. So this is really a thing to consider. Climate circularity, if we can combine it, then we come to a credibility of the livestock system of the cattle. What happened in this period? I was so happy that I was invited in 2011 to become a member of the leadership of the Global Research Alliance on agricultural greenhouse gases, where we were able to couple 3,000 researchers all over the world to share all their ideas and the data, and with that group we really came to short-term mitigation options, short-term improvement of the practice. The Global Research Alliance, together with the SAI, the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative Platform, we produced in 2015 a report with 23 easy-to-adopt mitigation options for every farmer in the world, small farmer, intensive farmer, to mitigate the climate impact. So that's also a point. I see a lot of data about the LCAs of meat and dairy based on old data, not on the improved practices that we have, and it's improving, so we need the good new data. We can take up with direct mitigation options a 50% reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions from livestock. And we are guesstimate, at least for the Netherlands, I know it for sure, that we are already half away from the planet, from the Paris perspective, 1990 as a reference. But there is another 40% beyond the horizon, and that is the 40% that comes when you have the benefits of the circularity, which means that, better use of crops, better use of land, a broader use of feed resources, smart use of the manure, organic fertilization and carbon sequestration. I was thinking about the 10%, but probably the 10% is the cooling down effect of the degraded methane. I leave it there for the climate, because it is quite straightforward. We should not hindered by the argument that cows are bad for climate, point, because that's not true.
Okay, for the last part, so we know that climate and efficiency are two major issues for the livestock sector, and especially ruminants. But we need also not to forget the other issue, or which enters as Christ said, some other benefits. The first is that ruminants produce healthy, tasty, and I think appreciated food, at least for 95 or 96% of the population. But again, and this morning we have a brilliant present lecture showing the advantage of animal-based product. But within the animal-based product, we can change sometimes the composition and the nutritional value. This is here the comparison between total mixed ration and grass-fed animals. You see that the ratio of, so first, we have a decrease in saturated fatty acid, but we know that it is not an essential issue because saturated fatty acids are also not bad for our health, but which know that we need to reduce the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And you see that a threshold value is claimed for nutritionists according to the current knowledge that we need to be below a value of 4 or 5. And you see that we have far lower this value in this situation and not so high in this one. In the same time, moving from this kind to other kind of livestock farming system, we increase the content of vitamin A, vitamin B6, vitamin B9, which is high in all situations, but over higher in the grassland-based system. We change the quality of the product, the color and the taste of the product, and which is very important in our society today, we change the perception of the society, because in our society, consumers, citizens, make an assumption that outdoor animals, it's better for animal welfare than indoors animals. We have not necessarily a scientific proof of that, but it is the way of thinking of the society. And it is why a lot of dairy industry in Europe, I make here some example, in Portugal, in Spain, in France, in UK, in Netherlands, either the industry or the retails, which is the case of Waitrose in UK, or the region, which is the case in France, in Brittany, claim that we need to develop a specific milk and dairy product based on grassland. It's all the dairy products are based on grassland in Ireland. So this is a point. The second point is, it was explained also by Anne Motet this morning, we need to take care of the metrics when we make comparison and when we try to draw the right decision. Comparing animal-based product and plant product, it often came on the table that the carbon footprint is far higher for 1 kg of animal product, but for 1 kg of plant product. But we forget that animal products are different and most often with higher content of essential nutriment as essential amino acid and their balance, are polyunsaturated fatty acid, minerals, we have a discussion about calcium this morning in terms of milk, vitamins, antioxidants, choline, and so on. So effectively, if we compare the carbon footprint of 1 kg of milk or 1 kg of soy drink, it is lower for the soy drink. But if we consider the amount of nutrient which is bring by 1 kg of milk compared to 1 kg of soya, which brings protein, but nothing else indeed, you see that the value is far higher for the soybean product than for the milk. So we need to take care of this aspect because we change totally the vision of the reality. Ruminants also produce biodiversity. And when you read the literature, ruminants are a catastrophe because we destroy forests, deforestation, and loss of biodiversity. We don't ignore this problem, and we make progress to reduce the problem of deforestation. And today, less and less soybean is used in Europe, and especially soybean coming from deforestation. But our livestock can produce biodiversity, both at the plot level, and it could be a win-win situation for farmers. Many farmers in Europe are grassland, perennial grassland in general, permanent grass, ryegrass also. If we use a mixed grassland based on legumes and grass. You have some plant, honey plant, and here you see with white clover you can attract bees, we can attract other species. So it is positive for the biodiversity. Don't forget that considering the permanent grassland, which are only permanent grassland because livestock are grazing. Without livestock, this area will disappear and will become a shrub and forest probably. 50% of endemic plant species of Europe are part of the grassland biotope. So it's our richness of biodiversity in Europe is grassland species. At a more larger level, landscape, first ruminant, you see here, produce beautiful landscape that are appreciated by tourists, but behind this, it's produced also a lot of biodiversity because landscape is rich in corridors for the wild fauna, for insects, for birds, and we increase the population of this kind of animals from insect to small mammalian to livestock. It is also an ecological food chain. We have plant to feed insect, insect to feed small mammal, and small mammal to feed birds. So this is an ecological chain which is maintained thanks to ruminant. Totally different in the open field system where the hedge disappeared because we in the recent past we increased the size of the field for machinery. And here is just an example showing that in a landscape, the proportion of semi-natural habitat, each dot is 10 square kilometers, according to the number of semi-natural habitat, mainly permanent grassland. You have here the relationship with the species involved in pollination, which increase, for sure, in link with this slide. And in France, we have some statistics showing that one livestock unit, one beef, one dairy cows, maintain 90 meters of hedge. And hedge is a source of biodiversity, and it is also a source of wood to produce it in the after. But that's not all. Ruminant can foster soil quality by two means, by a perfect use of manure and again by grassland. Grassland is a key for a lot of things. And when we speak about soil fertility, it's not only chemical fertility, it's also structural stability and biological fertility of the soil. And the benefits of it at the end is more biomass could be produced, high soil organic matter content, and less erosion. I will show you some examples of this. Here, it's an experiment, a long-term experiment, which began in 96 in France, showing in the same, quite near Paris, we produce, it's a rotation for crop production. Here, in this situation, every 2 years, we bring manure, solid manure on the soil, and here only mineral nitrogen fertilizer. Obviously, it's at the same level of total and input. And you see here the increase in content of soil organic matter, comparing to the situation with only mineral fertilizer. Here, it's comparing on the mean data at European level. It's, this data came from a European project I manage, Multisward, and we work on the Eurostat statistic. You see that organic matter content under a crop soil is 40 tons per hectare. It's double under grassland. And if we consider the risk of erosion, there is almost no risk of erosion under grassland, but high risk of erosion under cropland. If we consider the biological fertility, here, again, value with the quantity of invertebrate, mainly insect, on the soil. It's much higher, more than 3 tons in this situation and only 0.5 ton here. And if we consider using ADN, we can determine the population of microbe in the soil. Again, an increase in microbial population in soil under grassland compared to cropland. When we come to more biomass, this is again the result of the long-term experiment showing the yield of maize grain or maize silage, but here it's expressed in terms of maize silage because we consider all the plant, with monoculture with mineral fertilizer only, 13 tons, with solid manure and same level of nitrogen, more than 14 tons. And if we produce maize after grassland, more than 15 tons. So it shows that grassland is also useful in a rotation to boost biomass production because of the residual after grassland. And at the end, and not the least, indeed, ruminants boost food security at world level. We discussed this morning about the role of ruminant in South countries. And ruminants in this country contribute to intensify agriculture by providing fertilizer and providing workload. In this situation, with the small farmers, okay, this crop produces methane, but perhaps it's not so grave. But it don't produce CO2 because we have no carbon fossil in this situation. So these animals don't produce a lot of milk, but produce workload and allow to increase the productivity of cropland because the return of manure. The animals go to the savanna to eat cell wall and put their dejection on the field here. So it's a transfer of fertilization.
Yeah, and that brings us to the end. I had a lot of take-home messages from the other presentations that are very helpful. So I also hope that our take-home messages are very helpful. For the first one, think twice before you step into a simplistic protein transition. It seems very logic. Livestock is a problem. If you reduce the livestock, we reduce the problem. But it is not structural and it is not the final good solution because there are trade-offs that we don't want. And we do not know it because we cannot imagine a food system without livestock. Secondly, nutritious resource security by circularity. The picture of the future I didn't mention, but in the Netherlands, an agroeconomic giant, so to say, our economy is based on agribusiness. We decided, our minister decided to go for the circularity as the next step to be in the top of the world when it comes to agro production. And therefore, we decided in the Netherlands not to come up with a policy reducing livestock. Ruminants are champions in the circularity. The shed of cattle can be mitigated, and the next presentation will also about that. And can even be counterbalanced. That's also a take-home message from today. And grass and other marginal crops, that's the basic rationale behind having livestock production, and the circularity using the residuals that otherwise would be lost is the bonus, and not the other way around. But in that case, you can convince the society if they want to be more smart to do that. And finally, not the least important, planetary boundary management requires unbiased metrics and realistic models based on the system, not on elements of the system. Thank you. Oh no, sorry.
And don't forget that we have, as Animal Task Force, 2 events each year. This year, the topic of the year is toward climate-smart European livestock farming. So we will full in the greenhouse gas mitigation and carbon storage for the soil. The first meeting it's in common with EIP. It is a special session here in Ghent this year, and we will have another seminar in November 6th here in Brussels. Here we invite some people from DG Climate to give the view of the policymaker to some extent on this, and we will have also an interesting talk about a simulation done toward a more agroecological European agriculture in the future. This work was done by a think tank which is not involved in livestock production, not at all, mainly on crop production indeed, and they conclude that we need ruminant for a more sustainable agroecological agriculture in Europe in the future.
Gentlemen, let me keep you here on the stage. I'm sure we have some questions down there, so let me just pass the microphone. So please put your hand up if you have any questions. And while we're waiting to see if somebody's brave enough, I'm not sure if I can see a hand there. I have a question about that Ethiopian cow, because that was fascinating. Do you have an intention to extend that anywhere else and to do that?
Yeah, and the intention has already been implemented. We did this first study in 2013 on the basis of a charity fund. Some people in Holland that think that. And since then, 12 PhD students were there working on wood shredders in Brazil, on rice steaks in Vietnam, on kind of crop in Indonesia, crop residual in Indonesia. 12 for various countries. Only I'm awaiting for the number 13 for the European or the North American situation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? We have a question here. Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Peyraud. So I would like to let from your side what is the challenge for the use of the grasslands in the EU. We have, I think, a good information about what is the consistency in terms of areas, but I'm not sure if we have information about the real use of these grasslands. And of course, we cannot use all of these areas, but what do you think should be the step forward for that?
The step forward, there is different steps. Not one by one, but probably all together. The first is to convince farmers that grassland can be and should be productive, which is not the case in many countries, except Ireland. But for many countries, grassland is not producive. But indeed, it's a problem. When we look at which amount of milk or meat we produce per hectares of grassland compared to the grass growth given by models, we observe it's really an important loss in France, especially, but 1 to 3 tons of dry matter of grass is produced each year and is not eaten by the animals. Because farmers think firstly on the performance of the animals and not on the performance per hectares. This is a huge chunk. It's totally different in New Zealand. Farmers think how many kg of fat and protein I produce per hectare. Not problem. Even if it's low per co, I have more co per hectare and I produce more. It's not the way of thinking in the west part of Europe. So we need to think on this. The second part is how we can improve production of grass. I mentioned quite rapidly that if we use mixed sward with grasses and legumes, we can reduce nitrogen fertilization and thus nitrous oxide production. We can use legume with swallow rooting or with deep rooting to use water when we have a small rain and to use water deep in the soil. So, and we have a result showing that we can produce by this way 1,000 to 2,000 liters of milk more per hectare per year compared to a classical perennial regress sward fertilizer with 200 kg of nitrogen, something like this. So these 2 points are very, very important.
And the key message from these 2 points is ecological intensification. Please go for ecological intensification of the marginal lands, because then you have a double purpose for these lands. Namely, it is a nice landscape, it's good nature, and people can go out to the countryside to see that. And you can produce, in an ecological intensification, a higher production with your cows and sheep. So not the fault of the past, trying to change the land in marginal areas for improving against the nature, but works with the nature in the marginal domain.
And in cropland, the question is how many grassland we need to maximize the productivity of the area in terms of food and with a good ecological services. If we have only cropland, we get some problems, and it's clear in many regions we decrease organic matter content of soil, we increase erosion and so on. So we need a minimum level of grassland and how many ruminants we can produce on this grassland. So in turn, we have questions about which kind of ruminant we need. Clearly, for example, in France, our breed are not well done today to maximize grassland use. They are selected to use cereals. So we need to think also about animal genetics in the future if we want to change and to go to a more ecological intensification in our system.
There's one more question, gentlemen. So you can't go just yet. We're keeping you here.
No, it's okay.
Just last one.
No.
Congratulations on a wonderful presentation. Really, the systems approach, that's my takeaway from your presentation, is that we really do need to think in terms of a system approach because of the planetary resource limitation. One thing that really struck me about your presentation was this aspect of livestock contributing to soil fertility, and improving soil fertility, reversing the negative impacts of erosion, which has been, for which crops are very largely responsible for. My question, you've been talking about ruminant manure in this improvement soil fertility. Does that work for other livestock, monogastric manure as well?
Who'd like to tackle that?
Yeah, for sure, and the manure in a good quality. So in more or less organic material like a compost or that kind of things, not just as a slurry, because that doesn't help. And it's not only the soil fertility, it is the soil quality. It's more than only the soil fertility. We can produce good fertile soils with synthetic fertilizers on a almost pristine medium, no soil quality at all. But the thing that we propose, especially for the marginal lands, go for ecological intensification. This is really a big part of it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope you managed to catch your train, and we really appreciate it. That was absolutely fascinating.